deserving listeners, it's just me today. I thought I would respond to some patron emails. This first email is from somebody that wants me to talk about how to set your rates in private practice. But before we get into that, let's introduce the podcast. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. So how are we supposed to set our rates in private practice? Well, I have a lot of thoughts about this because I not only have set my rates over the last 21 years in private practice for myself, but I've also supervised and advised many people in their careers regarding how to do that and how it matches up with marketing and how it matches up with insurance companies. And it's a complicated thing. So let's talk about it somewhat briefly here. The first thing that I want to talk about here is that a lot of people will run into a lot of pitfalls when they think about raising their rates. And I've fallen for some of these pitfalls too. In general, in my experience, therapists and counselors don't charge enough. They tend to really worry and fret about raising their rates to a fair rate. And the reasons for this are various. One is that a lot of therapists and counselors don't believe that they're good enough to deserve a higher rate. They're like, I advise or supervise a lot of people who just graduated and they're starting their private practice, and they're like, someone told me to charge $100 an hour, but I don't feel like I'm worth it, because the student, the recent grad, will have been working as an intern for free. In fact, a lot of times, in essence, they essentially have to pay themselves thousands of dollars in credits anyway to have an internship. And so they are not used to being paid anything, let alone anything greater than, $20 an hour or something. Because a lot of these agency jobs pay about that, like $20 to $30 an hour. And so the idea that they would charge $100 per session is really quite shocking to them. And they feel like, oh, no, I surely I'm not worth that. And the thing I always say to that is you are worth it, which I'll get into more in a second. But the thing that I always tell people is that you're highly trained, your service is highly valued, you have a wonderful service that you're providing people. I mean, I supervise marriage and family therapists a lot, and one of the things that they can actually do with their career is actually save a marriage, right? They can make people better parents. They can help families get along better. I mean, that's a tremendous service. It's worth a lot of money, in my opinion, and other people's opinions too. And so what I say to people is, you're absolutely good enough to deserve the rate that you deserve. Another thing that therapists will say to themselves is that, well, if I raise my rates, then poor people won't be able to afford me, right? And, this is a problem worth considering for sure. We don't want to, as a profession, have our service be so expensive that, half of the population of our community cannot afford us. That isn't fair. It participates in the marginalization of marginalized people and runs counter to everything that we stand for. On the other hand, it's not our fault that this is a problem. It's our government fault. It's the voters' fault. It's the fault of the voters and the public and the politicians for not dedicating money from taxes to help pay for services for these people. For example, in Washington State, I can't take Medicaid, so in private practice, I can only take clients who are paying out of pocket or who are using their medical insurance, and medical insurance and I can't take state medical insurance, Medicaid, federal medical coupon kind of stuff, and therefore the vast majority of people so unless I do pro bono work, which I'll get into in a second, I can only work with people who have enough money just to give me a check. I charge $150 right now. So, just to give me a check for $150 every time we meet, or they have medical insurance that can pay for it. And people who have medical insurance, good medical insurance, are often middle class or higher class, socioeconomic class. So, so that is now. What if the government actually allowed for private practitioners to take Medicaid, which they do in some states, some communities? What if the state dedicated more tax dollars to mental health so that they could pay a higher rate, by the way, with Medicaid and make it more appealing to people like us? So yes, raising your rates will make it harder for poor people to afford your services. One, that's true, and that's worth considering. So you might want to keep your rates low based on that. Might want to have a sliding fee scale based on that, for sure. But on the other hand, like I said, it's not our fault that poor people can't afford our service. That's the voters' fault and the government politicians' fault. The other thing is that there are many services available to people with medical coupons that are good services. There are agencies in the area that have fine therapists work there, and they can go there. And so it's not like they don't have access to resources, because they often do. So there is those things. Another thing that I hear people talk about when they're worrying about raising their rates or even setting a competitive rate is that they're saying, well, I'll lose clients, right? If I raise my rates, the clients who are seeing me, they're all going to drop out. And yeah, that's something worth thinking about, but it's not likely to happen if you raise your rate slightly. I've never lost a client for raising my rates. I've been raising my rates, steadily ever since I started 21 years ago. I started out charging $35 per session, and they were in-home sessions. So I would drive out to the house, take a half-hour drive there, do an hour session, half-hour drive back, $35. So essentially, I was charging, $12.50 an hour, or no, sorry, $17.50 an hour. Where's my math? Yeah, and so. Now, whenever I say this to students, younger students, they're like, well, that was 1997, and, inflation has grown quite a bit since then. And yeah, sure, but not that much, It's not like I was practicing in 1915 or something, It was a while ago, but in fact, I should look up the exact inflation rate since then. Just a second. Okay, so it's looks like about 50, 60% inflation since 1997 to 2018. So my $35 session in 1997, today that would be about $55. So in today's dollars, it's like I was doing an in-home session for $55 per session, which is, pretty low. Okay, so again, I've been raising my rates ever since then, and I've never lost a client due to raising rates. But it is worth thinking about, especially if you're going to do a big rate jump. Now, having said all that, I actually did take issue with my therapist many years ago who raised his rates. He was charging $75 per session. This would have been in 1996, which, according to the inflation calculator, is about $120 per session. So he was charging me $120 per session. I didn't have my medical insurance didn't pay for it, and so I was just paying him out of pocket while I was in graduate school, and I didn't have much money. So he was raising his rates to, or no. What did I do? I was seeing him every week, and I was like, man, I can't afford $75 every week, because that's just too expensive for me. I think I was on a sliding fee scale for him at the time. I don't know. Anyway, I said I wanted to go down to every other week, because I was like, I can't do $300 a month, but I could do $150 a month. So how about that? And he's like, well, if we do every other week, then I'm going to have to charge you $100 a session, which according to our inflation calculator is $156. So he was, essentially in today's dollars, he's charging me $120. And then he says, well, if you go to every other week, I have to charge you about $160. And that was upsetting to me, because I was like, well, that's going to be why, why are you raising my rate just because I'm coming here every other week? And and it, I don't know, just hurt my feelings. But anyway, so I have been in a situation where a therapist raised their rates on me, and it didn't feel great. And so that's another thing to think about, is like how your clients feel about it, if you're seeing them and you're raising your rates. Another thing you can do that I've done with people before is that if they can't afford the rate increase, is that I'll just keep them at the previous rate, and then every new client I'll have a higher rate. Okay, another thing that I hear people say when they're thinking about having a rate increase or having a good rate as a competitive rate is they worry that they're not going to get any clients because people won't want to hire them because they charge too much. And yeah, that's worth considering. But I think there's a smart way to do it so that you're not completely pricing yourself out of the market. Also, another thing that as long as you have a reasonable price, the main factor in getting clients to hire you is marketing. So it has much more to do with other elements of marketing other than your price. Although price is a consideration. If a client is given 5 therapists and they all look like good therapists, and one of them charges half the price, then you could imagine that therapist might be considered over others. So it's worth thinking about. Another thing I hear people say when they're thinking about raising their rates is that they're worried about getting greedy. They're worried about, well, geez, am I just being greedy? Because, I could get by at the current rate. It's not that bad. And yeah, that's, I guess, worth considering. I mean, dig down deep and ask yourself, are you being greedy? Are you being overly materialistic or something? It's something worth thinking about. But to me, it's this really funny question that we ask ourselves that other professions rarely ask themselves. I know there are other professions that do ask themselves this, but not a lot of other professions do. What if someone's working at a corporation like Boeing or Microsoft or Starbucks or Amazon or something, and they get an opportunity to get a promotion and get a raise? Should they be asking themselves, well, maybe I shouldn't pursue that promotion because, I'm just being greedy. Maybe someone else deserves it better than I do. It's just like, come on, if the market can bear that price, then, you can consider that price. Plus the other thing is that if you charge more money, you'll presumably be able to provide more pro bono services, right? So that's another thing to think about. Or you'll feel much better about providing pro bono services. So, it could kind of balance itself out in that way. Another thing that I'll hear people say is that they're worried about looking greedy to other people. They'll be like, will people think I'm greedy for charging more? And the only thing I have to say to that is, don't worry about that. That's their problem. Okay, so here are some points as to why one should consider raising your rates. One is to avoid burnout. It's a funny thing. I didn't ever realize this until it happened to me and to people I supervise, that when you're working hard and you're not being paid enough, it has a much bigger toll on your energy level. Then if you are still working really hard, but you're getting paid what you think you deserve, or even a little more than you think you deserve, then people tend to get burnt out much less frequently. You're working hard all week and you have this sort of, you bump into this difficulty and you're thinking, oh man, this job is really hard. It's really stressful, but I'm getting paid a lot of money for this. So it makes it all worth it. It's a thing. And people say, oh, materialistic, focused on money, and, perhaps it's all worth having a discourse around. But let's get real here. We work because we need money and we like money. We work because we want to get paid and we like doing things with our money. Not only do we have bills, obviously, but we like to do fun things with our money too. And so money is a good thing, and it's okay to admit that. And that's a reality that I see a lot of people going through. It happens all the time when I see people graduate. Prior to graduation, these interns are working for free, and then all of a sudden they graduate and all of a sudden they start getting paid for their work. And even though they're not getting paid much, they're getting paid something. And all of a sudden their burnout becomes much less of a problem. And they're, in some ways, the job is even more stressful because they have less support and they have to work harder, but they are getting paid something, and it just feels good. It just gives you the energy that you need to get through the day when you know that you're being compensated monetarily. Another thing that you should think about when you should consider raising your rates is that when you charge more, it gives you the opportunity to work less, which means you can have a better work-life balance. This happened to me. I don't know the exact sequence of events, but at a certain point, I had, maybe 10 years into my career, I had reached this point where I only needed to work about 25 hours a week, and I earned enough money to pay my bills and live comfortably. And so I only had 25 clients a week. So I could have had 40 clients a week, right? That would have been the standard work week. And, it would have been fine, but I didn't need that much more money. And I didn't want to work that much because I had all these other projects that I wanted to work on outside of work. For example, this podcast. I started this podcast in 2008 when that was all I was doing. I wasn't working at Antioch. I wasn't a professor at the time. All I was doing was working 25 hours a week in private practice in a home office, so no commute. So I was just working 25 hours a week, sometimes 20 hours a week. And I was making a good enough living. And so it gave me enough free time to dedicate to the podcast. And I never thought about it until just now that the podcast, in essence, for the first 7 years of me doing the podcast, it was a pro bono service. I mean, the podcast is many things, but one of the things that it is that it is a way for me to give back to the community, a way for me to give back to other therapists, a way for me to give back to clients and people in general and society. It's my little way of trying to help. And for the first 8 years of the podcast, I wasn't making any money. In fact, I was losing money from, paying different kind of expenses for the podcast. And the reason why I was able to do that was because I was making enough money in my private practice and other things I was doing that allowed me to pay for and have time for this other thing that I was doing, which one could consider to be sort of a pro bono service, right? So that's another reason why you should consider raising your rates, because some people are sitting around, they're going, well, I'm working 45 hours a week and my rates are, enough for me to get by. And, I say, well, what if you raised your rates by 25%? You could cut back on your work week by 25%, and you could dedicate those hours to having more life satisfaction and also maybe giving back to the community somehow. Okay. So how do you set your rates? That's a big question. It's just like, what actual rate should you charge? Well, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's talk about that. All right, we're back from the break. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast, do so now. Go to patreon.com. Become a patron of the podcast and get access to hundreds of patron-only episodes in which we do deep dives on various interesting topics, I think, that you might enjoy. Plus, when you become a patron, it's just really a way for me to know that you appreciate this podcast. That's its main purpose. The premium content is just a perk above and beyond that. But because as I earn more money in the podcast, I can dedicate more time to it. And actually, over time, just a peek behind the curtain, I've been able to cut back on my private practice and dedicate more time to the podcast. Because my time at the university is sort of fixed because I can't really, I'm basically full-time there. But the time that I can take away for the podcast is with my private practice. And so my private practice is actually pretty small now. Anyway, so how do you set your price? Well, the first thing you should do is to look at the median price in your area. What are other therapists charging in your area? Well, then the second question is, how do you know what that is? Well, I have a study in front of me, and it provides those numbers. It's a study by Simple Practice, which is a software or online thing that therapists use to keep track of their clients' notes and stuff. It's a service that you pay for. I think it's like $30 a month, if I'm not mistaken. And it has a bunch of services for therapists, their record keeping, other kinds of stuff. I don't use it, but I have supervisees who do. Anyway, so there was a study by them. They actually looked into all the different data that they have around the United States to figure out different rates that are happening in cities and states and stuff. And these data are compiled for therapists, social workers, counselors, psychologists, all the people who use their service. And what they found was very interesting. My mind was blown by these data. I had no idea that there was such variability in the median rates across different areas. And if I was just to think intuitively about it, I'd be like, well, so the rich cities, they probably charge the most. You got your San Franciscos, you got your New Yorks, your Washington, D.C., Seattle. These cities are going to have your highest rates because there are enough rich people to pay for it, and the standard of living is higher, so therapists will charge more because their bills are higher and all this kind of stuff. And then I also thought, well, the lower the population, the lower the price, right? So you look at like North Dakota or Alaska, these places probably have really low rates, right? Because the standard of living is lower and people don't want therapy so much out there. Well, that's totally wrong. Like, it's always great to speculate, and then when you look at the data, you're just like, oh, the world doesn't conform to my, random speculations. So nationwide, let's just start there. So the median rate, so they took the median rate as opposed to the average rate because, it's a more meaningful number, because you'll have outliers, people who charge $20 and people who charge $500 a session or something. So the median is the one to go for. And nationwide, the median rate for 2017 was, drum roll please, any guesses out there? $120 per session. $120 per session nationwide. So this is median, which means that there's a bunch of people that are, between 110, 130, or 100 and 140. There's a lot of people in that zone. And then you have, fewer people at the edges of the bell curve, which are, below 80 and above 160 or something. So median rate, 120. But when you actually look at different states and different cities, you see a wide variety from the lowest. So just think, what would be the lowest? What state would have the lowest rates? Well, the lowest rates is in Florida, which has a median rate of $70. $70. That's almost half of the median rate in the nation. So in Florida, so that's just the median. That means that some people are charging like $30 a session and other people are charging $100 a session, right? So $70 in Florida, followed by Indiana at $80, Michigan, Missouri, Ohio are $90, Louisiana, Georgia, about $100. All the way up to, drum roll please, who's number one? Just think in your mind to say, what state would have the highest median rate for counseling and therapy? What do you think? Drum roll. It is Alaska. Alaska, of all places, number one at $160 per session. Median. That's median rate. That means that, probably ranges from $120 to $200. $120 to $200. That's like the range in Alaska. Median rate $160 per session. That's bizarre. Why? Because you go Florida, okay, sort of I don't know. I don't know how to make sense of that. And then you have Alaska, 160. And then you have New Jersey, and there's a number of states that have a median rate of 150. That's New Jersey, Illinois, Iowa, Hawaii, District of Columbia, and Arkansas. So again, it's like, because we tend to think of our country as like, well, you got the South, and then you got the Northeast, and you got the West Coast, and you got the Midwest and the Plains, and and the Southwest. But it's like none of this makes any sense because it's all kind of jumbled. Alaska, New Jersey, Illinois, Iowa, Hawaii, DC, and Arkansas. Like, what's the similarities between those states where the median price is 150 or 160? It's strange. Then you got South Dakota, 140, Nebraska, 140, Montana, 135, Wisconsin, 130, and then you have Washington, 130. So Oregon is 120, and California is also 120. So it's strange. It doesn't seem to make any sense to me. I'm sure people have speculations. It's like, well, maybe because they're in Montana, for example, it's at the high end because there's so few therapists there that they can charge more. But all you got to do is go, okay, well, Idaho is right next to Montana, and it's much less at a median rate of 100. Kentucky, I'm guessing isn't overflowing with therapists, and it's at 100. You have Kansas, which is at 100, and you have Arkansas, which is at 150. It's really strange. I can't really figure out it at all. So anyway, think about the median rate in your area. Also, cities are different. So even though Florida is the lowest at 40 or at 70 median rate, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach area is 250. The median rate in Miami is $250 a session. That's median. That is insane. Median. That means that people are ranging from $200 per session to $300 per session. And then right outside of Miami, you have median rates in the rest of Florida of $70 per session. It's just so weird. The highest cities are Miami, New York, San Jose, Raleigh, Nashville, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, Cleveland, Sacramento, Buffalo, Charlotte, and then Seattle. And then it goes Atlanta, Birmingham, Hartford, Providence, Virginia Beach, and then Portland. So Seattle is 15 out of 50. And the lowest city is Orlando at 68, the Orlando-Kissimmee, Sanford region. Love that name, Kissimmee. Pretty low there. Detroit, 75. Minneapolis, 75. So it doesn't make any sense. Minneapolis is like, I always consider Minneapolis to be like the Seattle of, the north part of the United States. When I go to Minneapolis, it always feels like Seattle. Like it feels like it's it has a similar music scene and a similar kind of vibe to it. And yet it's third to last at $75 per session median. Again, that means that you have people charging much lower than that. And then Seattle is almost twice as much as that at 125. Now, of course, Seattle is expensive to live in, so you think, okay, it's going to be higher. But, these other cities like, Baltimore, I don't think of Baltimore as being super expensive to live in compared to like Seattle and San Francisco. I'm sure it's not like super cheap, but it's not one of the, people don't, or Nashville, for example. Nashville is up there too, ranked number 5 out of the different cities. Nashville's a nice town for sure. When I was there, I was like, man, this is kind of fancy out here. There's huge palatial homes and everything. But it just doesn't have any rhyme or reason to it to me. Maybe this is somehow related to income. I guess Miami has a lot of super rich people, so maybe that's it. Maybe that's what this is a representation of. It's just like how many super rich people live in your town, But like, I don't know, Charlotte is Charlotte known for having super rich people? Certainly Sacramento is starting to have a lot of rich people, San Jose, New York. Anyway, the point is that when you look to the data. So when you're in whatever city you're in, now you don't have to charge the median price, right? But it will give you an idea of what your competition is, right? So get to know that. And if I haven't read your number and you want to know what this is, email me. I can send you your specific number. But so that's one thing is to look at look at the median rates in your area and get an idea of the lay of the land. The other thing is to ask around. Just ask around to people you know, like how much do you charge, or how much does your therapist charge, or that kind of stuff. Another thing is look on Psychology Today. Psychology Today, for whatever reason, over time has become the default place for all therapists to have a registry. Whenever you're trying to find a therapist, the best database is held by Psychology Today, and they have their prices listed. They have their general prices listed. I don't know how accurate that is because there's no way for Psychology Today to know if the people's profiles are accurate or not, but they disclose what they disclose a number anyway. And you can actually look in your zip code. So wherever your private practice office is going to be in a zip code, just type that into Psychology Today and look at all the therapists in your area in terms of what they're charging. And that gives you another lay of the land, right? And you can also look by experience level and by service, right? So if you're a psychologist that provides assessment services, that's it's going to be a higher rate than if you're a recent grad from a counseling program and you are providing CBT services. So that's another thing to look at in terms of the nuances. I just did it just now in my own zip code and found a pretty wide variety of charges, from people saying that they charge as low as $60 a session to a guy charging $150 to $250 per session, which was a little weird because the dude had less than 1 year of experience in the field, and he's charging as much as $250, which, good for him if he can get that. And it made me wonder because he looked like an old, wise therapist. So that always bothered me when I was in graduate school. And when I graduated, I looked young. I was young. I was 26, and apparently I looked even younger than that. And I felt like, I was doing a good job, and I felt like I was a good therapist. And then I had this supervisee, actually, who, well, I don't know if I was supervising him, but he had less experience than I did anyway, like by a year. And he was like 60 years old, and he had gray hair, and he had a real kind of good therapist face, and everyone assumed he was like super experienced and like knew all this stuff, but I knew him to be like a real noob, So it was frustrating to me that he was getting more respect just because of the way he looked. But anyway. Another thing to think about in terms of setting your price is how much money do you need? What's the cost of living? What's your family situation? Do you have student loans? Do you need to start saving for retirement? That's another thing that private practitioners often neglect is their retirement. I did. I completely neglected my retirement until I started working full-time at Antioch in 2009, and they forced me to. They have a benefit that's a retirement fund that they give, and so that. That's when I started my retirement when I was 38 years old, which isn't all that smart. But anyway, another thing to think about is where are you in your career? What's your experience level? Did you recently graduate? Have you been in the field for 20 years? Having said that, this sort of matters on some level, but it also doesn't. Some people say like, well, surely I can't charge that much if I just graduated and I'm starting a private practice. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, you're providing a wonderful service, and in some ways your service is just as good as people who've been in the field for 10 years. You have more energy. You're going to think about your clients more. So, don't short shrift yourself. One A general guideline that I was thinking about as I was thinking about this episode is maybe just start at like 80% of median. So when you first hang your shingle, figure out the median in your area. So looking at the median figures here. So if you're in Seattle and the median is 125, then maybe set your rates at like $100, right? So you just say it's not median, but it's close. So I'm going to set it at $100, knowing that my price is actually kind of low for the area, but it also feels good to me because $100 I can live with. And then maybe at 5 to 10 years, get it up to 100% of median, whatever it is at the time. So in Seattle, that'd be 125, maybe a little bit more. And then after, some amount of time, 5, 10, 20 years, get it up above median, right? Now you're at 150, maybe you're at 160. So maybe that's a metric to follow, is figure out median, match it up with your experience level, and go from there. Another tactic that I've worked with supervisees on is figure out a price that is conservative, that is, you're not trying to bite off more than you could chew. So if you're in, let's look at another city here. If you're in Boston and you have a median rate of $100 per hour, then, maybe charge $80, $75 an hour or something when you start off. And then over time, just slowly raise it. Maybe every year you raise it $5 or $10, So by year 5, you're charging $110 an hour or something. So you're just slowly raising it. And every time you raise it, you just assess, is the rate too high? Are people not coming to me because they say I charge too much? Are some clients leaving me because they can't afford me? And then if you take it too high, then maybe lower it. See, that's another thing that I tell people. It's like, if you raise your rates and it turns out to be a disaster, you can go back to the other rate. There's nothing saying you can't lower your rates, So that's maybe another tactic. Some tips for raises is make sure that you put your raises in your disclosure statement. So one thing that some people, including me, have in their disclosure statement is something about fees, and then it says in my disclosure statement, it says something along the lines of, just so you know, every so often I raise the rate by a certain percentage or a certain amount of money or something. And then, you're disclosing to people, look, just so you know, I raise my rates every now and then. In the same way that McDonald's raises its rates every now and then. I mean, that's one thing that I realized that I'm old, is that when I go to McDonald's or some other place that's similar, I'm always shocked at how expensive it is. Because to me, going to a fast food restaurant, it should cost you like $3.50. I mean, I remember in the mid-90s, I would go to Taco Bell because I didn't have any money, but I would go there for my lunch break. And I think I would get 3 tacos for $1. So I think I would buy like 9 tacos. and just fill myself up with terrible tacos. And, I bet you Taco Bell has a thing called Terrible Tacos now. That's a good name. Terrible Taco Tuesday for $2. So yeah, I know I'm old because I went to Taco Time for you local people out there today, and I think my bill was like $12 or something. And I was like, that's just for me. Like, what? How did things get so expensive? Maybe not 12. I don't know how much it was. Anyway, my point is I'm getting old. So have it in your disclosure statement that you're going to occasionally raise your rates. I find that that's mostly for your sake, because your clients won't read it and they won't remember it even if they do. But if you commit to that statement, sometimes it'll make you actually follow it. Because if you can't tell, I advocate for people to raise their rates. Not because I blanketly think everyone should charge astronomical rates, but because I almost always find that therapists are undercharging for their service when they deserve more. So anyway, another thing to do is to plan raises in advance. So whenever I have a rate hike, I will plan it like 9 months in the future. I'll tell everyone, by the way, at the end of the year, blah, blah, blah. And then when it happens, it feels so much better than if I just suddenly do it. It's like, well, 9 months ago, I decided this, so I better follow through. And also, like I said, tell your clients in advance. So you can tell them, months in advance. It just feels better to tell people in advance anyway. For me, I started, like I said, charging $35 an hour, which is in today's dollars, $55. I started. I had my very first client who hired me, and I was so desperate for private practice clients because I was, working at an agency at the time, and didn't want to work at an agency, and my rate, my wage was $13 an hour, which in our little calculator here is $20 an hour in today's dollars. So in today's dollars, I was earning $20 an hour. And I was like, well, okay, so if what could I charge this client? They've hired me and I'm offering to go to their house. What could I charge? And I'm thinking, well, I get paid $20 an hour in today's dollars. And well, I'll just do it in the dollars of the past because it's confusing me. But so I'm like, okay, I'm getting paid $13 an hour. Well, what if I just doubled that? So I think that's what I did. I was just like, okay, I'll just, I'll charge $35 an hour. I mean, that's not double, but you know what I mean? It's just like more. And it felt good because I'm like, I'm earning more money than I am at my agency. And so, it would take me, 20 minutes to drive to the house. I do the therapy for an hour and I would do the full hour. I wouldn't do 50 minutes. And then 20 minutes back home and, 10 minutes for paperwork or something. And it felt good, man, because I was like, man, $35 and, for 2 hours of work, that's pretty good, And then very quickly, another person hired me to do in-home family therapy. And I was like, oh, 35. Plus they were further out. Their house was, so I lived in North Seattle, and my first client lived in it wasn't Shoreline, or maybe it was Shoreline. And so that's pretty close. But this client lived in Redmond, if you're familiar. And I was like, man, traffic, 520, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, well, I got to charge more. And then I was like, how about 80? So my first client, $35 an hour. Second client, $80 an hour. So I had a pretty big rate hike in the span of 2 weeks. Now, 80 was, still pretty low, I would think, if I do it in our little calculator here. It's 125 in today's dollars. Huh, that's funny. It's funny when you actually look at the inflation situation. So I was actually charging median for the area for today in today's dollars. Huh. Well, now I don't feel so foolish, but definitely foolish because I'm spending, a lot of driving time, an hour of driving at least, maybe an hour and a half sometimes if there's traffic, maybe 2 hours sometimes. And so I'd be having that, right? So I was really only getting $40 an hour in essence. But, it felt good because I'm building my private practice. I'm definitely earning more money. So even if I'm earning $40 an hour, that's way more than $13 an hour, right? So I felt good. But so I kept it at 80 for a while, but then I pretty quickly started raising it up from there. And then over time, I started getting on insurance panels. And then I started charging for driving time. And then I started saying, I don't do in-home anymore. You have to come to my office. This is all over the span of like the first 5 years of my practice. Eventually, it was $100 an hour and then $120 an hour per session. It was $120 for a long time. Like I remember it being $120 for many years. I sort of got to that point and then I was like, okay, it feels good. And then whenever the idea of me raising my rates came up, I just felt really bad. I felt all those things. I felt, well, am I being greedy? What if my clients hate that? And blah, blah, blah. And then, and I just never, so I fell for all those pitfalls, and I never raised my rates, even though I probably should have. But then what really happened that made me really want to raise my rates was, I started working at Antioch again, and full time, and I didn't have as much time for my private. So I went from full-time private practice, and that's all I was doing, to full-time at Antioch University while having a full-time practice. So, I didn't fire a bunch of clients. I kept all my clients in private practice, and I worked full-time at the university, and my time was extremely stretched thin. And then a year after that, I started my doctorate program, and I was going full bore on that, like full time on that. So I was in a band at the time, by the way, and I was doing the podcast. So in addition to being in a band that practiced once a week at least, and was in a podcast that recorded once a week, I had a full-time job at a university. I was in full-time school in my doctorate, and I had pretty much a full-time private practice. It was pretty insane. And so I was like, well, what can I get rid of? I can't cut back at Antioch, right? I don't want to cut back on my doctorate. I want to go as fast as possible. So what can go? Well, the band actually went. That was one thing that I quit. But another area was my private practice. And so I started cutting back my hours. But the other thing I did was I was like, well, I could raise my rates. That might sort of discourage some people from seeing me. That if I raise my rates, I might, in my head, I was like, well, if I raise my rates and I lose a few clients, I'm not going to really cry about it because I'm overworked right now anyway. That was sort of the thing. Also, I wanted to tell myself that I should get paid more because the time I'm spending on all this stuff is just so precious that I feel like I'm going to burn out if I don't get paid more for this. So I went up to 100. It took me a long time, like around 2013. That's when I went up to 130. And then soon after that, the similar thing started happening, and I was getting real stretched for time, and I was like, ugh, like this is getting rough, and I really feel like I'm not sure. And I started hearing about other people charging a lot more than me. Like I started hearing about people charging 150, 170. One of my colleagues was charging 250, and I was like, this is bullshit. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to, so in 2016, 2 years ago, I went to 140. And then in 2018, this year, I went to 150, and that's where I'm at now. And I'm probably going to raise it again soon, probably to 160. I'm at a point now in my career where I feel like I'm pretty good at my job, and I feel like I provide a pretty good service, and I'm an expert on how to do this. I teach it at a university. I train people. And I just feel like if anyone's going to have a high rate, it should be me, right? On the other hand, I don't depend on that income very much because I have other income sources, right? So it just, like on that greedy thing, I just feel like, well, like if I really thought about it, I probably could charge $200 a session if I wanted to. I could probably go, or even $250. I could probably go up to that. And yeah, some of my clients will drop out, but I have people who contact me all the time. And yeah, maybe some of the clients who contact me can't afford that, but I only need a percentage of people who can afford it. And so, I could do that and I would earn more money. I'd be wealthier, but I'm pretty good right now. So I'm like, it's fine, 150, and then, raise it every now and then, every couple years, maybe raise it $10 for cost of living and inflation or something. I don't know. So, so that's my path. That's my journey with my pricing. I would say that there was a pretty good chunk of time where I was
charging $20 to $30 less than I probably should have been charging. So yeah. Now, I should also say that in all of this, there's a whole thing about me using insurance, medical insurance, right? Which the medical insurance companies don't care what you charge. They set the price for you because you're under contract, if you're a contracted provider. And so for example, right now, the only panel I'm on is Premera Blue Cross, and their rate is about 120. So even if I raise my rates to 160, about half or more of my clients are actually using Premera. And so it doesn't matter because I could raise my rates to 160, but with Premera, it'll stay 120 because I'm under contract. So, which is fine with me. I like using medical insurance because clients are able to just, they just have to pay their copay. And I find that feels good to me, that I'm not draining their pocketbook in the process of me doing this service. So yeah. Also, I find that people who are on medical insurance tend to be more long-term for that reason, because it's not quite a huge amount of money out of their pocket. So if you're going to therapy and you write a check for $20, as opposed to you're going to therapy and you write a check for $160. It's a pretty big difference. So anyway, like whenever I go to therapy, I try to use my medical insurance. Anyway, all right. So some final tips here on setting your price is, number one, value yourself. You are valuable as a person in this world. One, two, you are valuable as a professional. You deserve it, as I always say, right? You're a highly trained professional. I am constantly telling this to novice therapists because most novice therapists drastically underestimate their worth in this world and within the profession. I think it's because, again, they have been an intern usually in their graduate program, and they were begging for clients and walking around like they're second-class citizens, and they just don't value themselves. And then even if they did get hired at an agency, they'd only get paid like $22 an hour anyway. And so they're just like, well, I'm barely above minimum wage. That's what I'm worth. And I'm just like, ugh, no, you are one of, you're in the top 0.1% of educated individuals on this planet. And you have a highly trained technical skill. You know how to diagnose, you know how to treat people, you know how to understand mental illness, you know how to get supervision, you know what books to look in, you know how to understand statistics and research and treatment modalities. And this is it's similar to a physician, right? A physician is the same thing. They're highly trained, very valuable professionals that deserve to be paid on that level, right? So value yourself, very important, because until you do, you probably won't charge enough, that you probably will undercharge, unless you want to undercharge. The whole thing here is I'm pushing people to charge more, but the whole thing here is that if you're cool with like, you know what, I'm going to in my area, I live in Riverside, San Bernardino, California, and the median rate here is $80. And you know what? I'm going to charge $50 a session because that's fine with me. I have my 30 clients and I pull in $3,000 a week, and is that how it works? 30? No, 1,500 a week. Gosh, my math here. I'll just do it in Excel. $50 times 25, no, 30 clients. Yeah, 1,500 a week. Okay, sort of had it right. Gosh, I used to be much better at that. I think it's because I feel embarrassed, and so it kind of slows down my math abilities. But anyway, you know what? I live in Riverside. I'm gonna charge $50 a session. I know it's lower than median, but I'm earning I'm earning $6,000 a month. I'm cool with that. I have a little house doesn't cost that much to buy. My mortgage is pretty low. I have a sensible Toyota, and I'm fine. I'm good. If that's how you want to live, I commend that. That is awesome. There's no reason why you can't live that life. But if you are keeping your prices low because you feel like you're not worth it, then I say that is unfair to you. Also, with regards to your pricing, is do your research. Like I said, look up other people in your area, look up the median. Also, don't think about it too much. I talk with a lot of people about at the beginning of their careers. It's like, well, how do I set my price? And they'll think about it for months, and they'll talk about it for months, and they'll be like, oh, well, sometimes I think this, and sometimes I think that, and when I have not a supervisee like that, I'm just like, just set the goddamn price because it doesn't actually matter that much. Because what I've seen people do is in my area, what I advise people to do is I say, just charge $100, or 90. Do you feel good? I'll be like, do you feel good about $100 a session? And they'll be like, yeah, that feels good. And I'll be like, then just set it at $100. It's actually, kind of averagey. It's kind of low. And, it's a good price. You're not getting shafted with that price. And they'll be like, really? And I'll be like, yeah, just set it. Because a lot of times, like I said, as long as you're somewhere in the ballpark of a reasonable price, the main issue is how you market yourself overall in terms of how you get clients and who you market yourself to. So, so dilly-dallying about the price is kind of silly. The other thing is you can say $100, but I have a sliding fee scale. And then when people come in and they're like, I'm interested in the sliding fee scale, you can be like, okay, well, you can have a conversation about that. But anyway, so another tip to novice people is don't think about it so much because I find that when you think about it too much, one, it causes a lot of stress, and two, there's a lot of unnecessary debating in your mind. And I guess this is the same advice for people raising their rates. It's just like, like for me, I think what I need to do to myself in terms of raising it to 160 is just don't think about it. Just say, I'm gonna like, so I guess I'd be saying, okay, January 1, 2019, I'm going to raise it 160. And just do it, don't think about it so much because you're, I don't know, just a little tip. Another thing to think about is your burnout level. As I said, money can fix burnout sometimes. And also, because it makes you feel like you're getting actually compensated what you deserve, but also because, like I said, you can work less if you're charging more. So, there's a lot of really burnt out therapists out there. And that when you're burnt out, you are less good of a therapist and you run the risk of quitting the profession altogether. So you're not doing anyone any favors if you're getting burnt out, and maybe raising your rates will help with that. Also, don't listen to people who say you should charge a really low fee. I've heard this before from people. They'll be like, oh, one of my supervisees or one of my instructors or, someone told me I should charge like $40 a session or something. And I'm just like, no, if you want to, but you don't have to, you're worth $100 a session. You're worth $150 a session right now. So, I've heard random rumors out there of advice like that. And one, I don't think it's fair to you. And two, it doesn't usually, in my experience, result in you getting any more clients. That's what I did when I first started out. I was like, well, that's why I charged $35 an hour when I first started out, because I was like, well, if I charge 35, then maybe I'll get more clients. And what I found was clients, if your price is in a certain reasonable range, a lot of people don't even think about the price usually because they're so desperate for help. They don't really care, and they really want you. If they've found you through word of mouth or something, like that's where your marketing comes in. So if you have really great marketing and you have really good word of mouth, then people come to you and they've designated you as their person that they want to work with, and therefore price is much less of an issue, right? Their deciding factor is more of like, will this person fix my problem? People looking for therapy are rarely thinking about it in terms of how they can save money. There's certain purchases that have a lot to do with that, right? Like, I don't know, what's something that's like gas prices, right? You see two gas stations, one is half the price as the other one. Well, you're going to go with the one that has half the price, right? But when it comes to therapy, people are much less price conscious because they're much more interested in like, I need someone who is going to help me. And if I find someone through word of mouth or otherwise that I've designated as that person, I don't really care what they charge. And so, like I said, as long as it's reasonable, it usually works out. Okay. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Let me know what you're doing out there, what you clinicians are doing, or what tips you might have. I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say. Email me at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. Thanks for joining me. Please take care of yourself and charge what you deserve because you deserve it.